No one noticed the older black woman mopping the marble floors. They didn't know she built empires or that the CEO was her son, but when Greg Simmons splashed a glass of water on her head and laughed, everything changed. A hidden camera captured the moment, but what it revealed went deeper: a culture of casual cruelty, silent complicity, and financial rot she had come to observe. She stayed to expose, and when her identity was revealed, the entire office stood still because the woman they humiliated was about to dismantle them all. The fluorescent lights of the executive floor hummed, a sterile symphony that did little to warm the vast expanse of polished marble and gleaming chrome. Madame Eloise Carter, a woman whose true influence shaped industries, now moved through this corporate palace as a phantom. Her hands, usually adorned with the quiet glint of family heirlooms, now gripped the worn handle of a mop, damp with a generic, chemical-scented cleaning solution. The rough fabric of the janitor's uniform, a stark contrast to the bespoke silks she favored, chafed against her skin, a constant, physical reminder of the role she had meticulously adopted. She pushed her cleaning cart, its wheels a soft, almost imperceptible squeak. Down the long corridor, her gaze sharp and observant, despite the downturned humility her disguise demanded. Marcus, her brilliant son, and the visionary CEO of this very corporation, had implored her to do this. He spoke of a creeping malaise, a subtle shift in the company's once proud culture of respect and equality. He suspected the upper echelons, insulated by their power and privilege, had grown detached, perhaps even arrogant. See how they treat the invisible. Mother, he had urged, his voice heavy with concern, observe the unspoken hierarchies, the attitudes when they believe no one truly important is watching. Eloise, with her keen intellect and unwavering commitment to justice, had agreed, though a deep, unsettling premonition had gnawed at her. She had built a legacy of integrity, instilled in Marcus the unwavering principle that true strength lay in how one uplifted the most vulnerable, not in how one dominated them. To see that eroding within her son's domain was a personal affront. Her first few days were a blur of anonymity. Employees strode past her, their expensive shoes clicking on the very floors she meticulously cleaned, their conversations a cacophony of corporate jargon and casual dismissals. She was a fixture, an object in their periphery, rarely acknowledged, never truly seen. This invisibility was precisely what Marcus sought to expose. It was this deliberate blindness, this convenient erasure of those who performed essential, unsung labor that often bred contempt. Eloise felt a prickle of unease, a familiar sensation she hadn't encountered in decades, a phantom limb of past indignities now stirring. It was the sensation of being reduced, stripped of her identity and worth, purely by virtue of her perceived station. Then came Greg Simmons. He was a senior manager, a man whose tailored suits and booming voice seemed to fill every room he entered. His reputation preceded him, whispered in hushed tones by the other cleaners during their brief, furtive breaks in the dingy basement lounge. He's a menace, one whispered. Thinks he owns the place. Another mumbled about his temper and demands. Eloise had noted his disdainful glances, his tendency to leave his waste paper bin overflowing right next to the recycling, an unspoken test of the cleaner's servitude. She watched him interact with his subordinates, a condescending edge to his tone, a dismissive flick of his wrist that belied his polite words. He embodied the exact arrogance Marcus feared. The incident unfolded on a particularly busy Tuesday afternoon. Eloise was meticulously wiping down the gleaming glass wall of the main conference room, a task she had just completed minutes earlier, leaving the surface streak-free and sparkling. Greg Simmons emerged from the conference room, mid-conversation on his phone, his face contorted in a sneer. A clear glass of water sloshing precariously in his hand, he gestured wildly, his voice rising in volume as he berated someone on the other end of the line. As he passed Eloise, he deliberately, almost languidly, swung his arm, and the entire contents of the glass splashed directly onto her head. The cold water, shockingly sudden, cascaded down Eloise's face, soaking her hair and seeping instantly into the thin fabric of her uniform. It stung her eyes, a physical manifestation of the insult. She flinched, a small, involuntary gasp escaping her lips. The mop clattered softly against the polished floor. The water dripped from her eyelashes, obscuring her vision, but not her awareness. The distinct sound of Greg Simmons's laughter, sharp and unapologetic, pierced the sudden silence. He stood there, a towering figure in his expensive suit, his chest puffed out, a triumphant smirk twisting his lips. His eyes, devoid of any remorse, held a cruel amusement as they swept over her drenched form. "Oh, my apologies. Cleaner," he drawled, his voice thick with sarcasm, the word cleaner dripping with contempt. "Clumsy of me. You seem to be having a refreshing day. Wouldn't you say?" His words were aimed not just at her, but at the cluster of office employees who had paused their work, drawn by the sudden noise and the unmistakable sound of ridicule. A ripple of nervous chuckles spread through the onlookers. A few employees exchanged quick, uncomfortable glances, but no one intervened. Most simply averted their gaze, returning to their keyboards with an exaggerated air of sudden industry. Unwilling to challenge the unspoken power dynamic, one younger employee, a woman with bright, curious eyes, briefly met Eloise's gaze before quickly looking away, a flicker of shame in her expression. Another, a man in a crisp shirt, pulled out his phone, pretending to check messages. But Eloise caught the glint of his camera lens. He was recording, not to help her, but to capture the spectacle, to be part of the silent, complicit audience. The humiliation was not just physical, it was a profound, public assault on her dignity. Greg Simmons's laughter echoed, a triumphant bray, as he walked away, his shoulders shaking with mirth. The weight of the water on her uniform felt like a physical burden, heavy with the collective indifference of the onlookers, the sting of being an object of entertainment for those who considered her less than human. Eloise stood there, water dripping from her chin, her uniform clinging uncomfortably. A single defiant tear, indistinguishable from the water, tracked a path down her cheek. The office resumed its rhythmic hum, as if nothing untoward had happened. The air thrummed with the unspoken agreement that this was acceptable, that a person in her position deserved such treatment, or at least that challenging it was not worth the risk. Her heart ached, not just for herself, but for every other invisible worker who had endured similar indignities, for the systemic devaluation that allowed such blatant disrespect to flourish. The hidden camera concealed within her uniform, a tiny eye capturing every chilling detail, felt heavier, more urgent. What she had witnessed was not just a lack of respect. It was a raw, undeniable display of racial bias, a deliberate act of dehumanization. She felt a profound sense of sorrow. But beneath it, a steel-hard resolve began to forge itself. This was precisely what Marcus needed to see. This was the rot he feared. And she, Eloise Carter, would ensure it was brought to light. The chill of the water dripping from her hair was a stark, physical sensation. Yet it barely registered against the icy grip of memory that seized Eloise. The bustling office, the indifferent faces, Greg Simmons's contemptuous laughter all faded into a distant hum, replaced by a vivid panorama from decades past. It was the early 1960s, and the humid air of her childhood home in rural Alabama clung heavy with the scent of magnolias and unspoken anxieties. Eloise, then a girl of 12, bright-eyed and brimming with an eager curiosity, had been taught by her grandmother, a woman of fierce dignity and quiet strength. That respect was earned through integrity, not demanded by decree, but the world outside their small, self-contained community operated by a different, cruel set of rules. She remembered the summer she accompanied her grandmother to the nearest town, a bustling hub of activity where the unspoken lines of segregation were etched as deeply as the cracks in the dusty pavement. Her grandmother, a renowned seamstress whose nimble fingers could transform plain fabric into exquisite garments, had been promised a significant order from Mrs. Albright, the wealthiest woman in town. Young Eloise, clutching her grandmother's hand, had watched with wishing innocent eyes as they entered the grand, ornate Albright mansion. The air inside was cool and heavy with the scent of expensive perfume. Mrs. Albright, a woman whose pearls seemed to gleam with an almost hostile brilliance, had greeted them with a condescending smile that never quite reached her eyes. She had been polite, overtly so, but her words, laced with an almost imperceptible disdain, had pricked at Eloise's nascent understanding of racial dynamics. "It's so good of you to come, Eliza," Mrs. Albright had purred, using her grandmother's first name with a familiarity that was less friendly and more dismissive. "I trust you can manage the complexity of this design. It's rather intricate." The implication hung heavy in the air. A black woman, no matter how skilled, was inherently suspect, her capabilities always to be questioned. Eloise remembered the tremor that went through her grandmother's hand, a slight clenching of fingers that spoke volumes of suppressed hurt. But her grandmother, ever the picture of grace, had simply nodded, her voice steady and calm. "I assure you, Mrs. Albright, I am more than capable." The exchange had left a sour taste in Eloise's mouth, a dull ache in her chest. It was the first time she had witnessed such veiled condescension, such subtle erosion of dignity. It was the first time she had seen a black woman, particularly one she revered, forced to endure such thinly veiled disrespect. Later that summer, the memory of another, more brutal incident flared. Eloise and her younger brother, Thomas, had ventured into town, sent by their mother to fetch supplies. They were walking past the town square, a place of vibrant community life for white residents, but a dangerous gauntlet for black folks. Thomas, easily distracted by a stray dog, had accidentally bumped into a young white boy, causing the boy's ice cream cone to fall to the ground. Before Eloise could even utter an apology, the boy's father, a large burly man with a face contorted in rage, had materialized seemingly out of nowhere. He had grabbed Thomas by the arm, his fingers digging into the child's flesh, his voice a guttural roar that sliced through the summer air. "Watch where you're going, you little darky. You think you can just run around ruining things." Eloise, paralyzed by fear and a terrifying helplessness, watched as the man's hand rose, a blur of motion, and slapped Thomas across the face. The sharp crack echoed in the suddenly silent square. Thomas stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock and pain, a single tear tracking a path through the dust on his cheek. Eloise wanted to scream, to rush forward, to protect her brother. But her grandmother's words, spoken often and with solemn gravity, echoed in her mind. "Sometimes, child, the strongest thing you can do is to endure, to survive, to choose your battles wisely, for some fights will only get you killed." She had seen the chilling glint in the man's eyes, the casual cruelty of the onlookers who had begun to gather, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and grim satisfaction. She knew, with the instinctive terror of a child raised in that era, that any protest, any act of defiance, would only escalate the violence, putting both her and Thomas in even greater peril. So she had remained silent, her small hands clenched into fists, her breath catching in her throat, forcing herself to swallow the bitter bile of injustice. She had helped Thomas up, her face carefully blank, her voice a whispered command to come on, as they fled the scene, the humiliation burning a brand into her very soul. These were not isolated incidents. They were threads in the tapestry of her childhood, constant reminders of her place in a world that sought to diminish her. She learned to observe, to assess, to choose her moments. She learned that sometimes silence was not submission, but a strategic retreat, a preservation of self for a greater fight. She saw her parents and their parents before them navigate a system designed to oppress, their endurance a testament to their unwavering spirit. They built their own successes in the face of systemic barriers, celebrated their quiet victories, and instilled in Eloise the belief that a true power came not from external validation, but from internal fortitude and the ability to uplift one's own community. These early experiences shaped her. They fueled her quiet ambition, her relentless pursuit of excellence, and her unwavering commitment to racial justice. She had risen, not by direct confrontation in every instance, but by meticulously dismantling the barriers piece by piece, by excelling beyond expectation, by building wealth and influence that could then be leveraged for systemic change. She understood that sometimes the most effective way to expose an injustice was to allow it to fully manifest, to let it fester and reveal its true, ugly nature before delivering the decisive blow. This was the strategy she applied to Marcus's company. She had chosen to endure Greg Simmons's blatant disrespect, not out of weakness, but out of a profound understanding of how power dynamics worked, and a desire to gather irrefutable evidence. The decision to remain silent, to simply stand there drenched and allow the insult to wash over her, was a conscious, calculated act rooted in a lifetime of similar experiences. It was the same quiet endurance that had allowed her ancestors to survive the unimaginable, to build foundations from barren soil, to raise families and communities despite relentless opposition. She knew that her son, Marcus, while brilliant and empathetic, had grown up in a different era. He had seen the fruits of her labor, the world she had fought to build for him, a world where he could thrive as a Black CEO. But he hadn't experienced the raw, visceral indignities she had endured, the daily microaggressions that chipped away at one's spirit, the overt acts of dehumanization that demanded a careful, strategic response. Now, as the memory receded and the hum of the office returned, Eloise felt a cold resolve solidify within her. Greg Simmons's actions were not just an isolated incident. They were a symptom of a deeper sickness, a casual racism that had been allowed to fester precisely because those who perpetuated it believed they could do so with impunity. Her endurance in that moment was not about accepting the humiliation. It was about exposing it. The hidden camera was not just recording a fleeting incident. It was capturing a pattern, a systemic issue. Her past had taught her the precise value of such evidence, the power of allowing the oppressor to reveal their true colors, unmasked and undeniable. She had endured, not for herself, but for Marcus, for the company he sought to lead with integrity, and for every other invisible worker who might otherwise suffer in silence. This time, silence would not be surrender. It would be the prelude to a deafening roar. The immediate aftermath of the water incident saw a brief, almost imperceptible shift in the office atmosphere around Eloise. Some employees, particularly those who had witnessed Greg Simmons's blatant act, now cast fleeting, uneasy glances in her direction. These glances were not born of sympathy, but of a curious mix of apprehension and perhaps a touch of guilt. They seemed to weigh the implications of what they had seen, perhaps fearing similar public humiliation if they ever fell out of favor, or simply wrestling with the discomfort of having been silent bystanders. A few, however, continued to move through the polished halls with an even more pronounced air of indifference, as if the incident had merely confirmed the established order: a cleaner was a cleaner, and such occurrences were simply part of the landscape. Eloise, ever the keen observer, noted these nuances, each one a brushstroke on the canvas of the company's true culture. She continued her routine, mopping the floors that gleamed under the harsh artificial light, dusting the expansive desks laden with expensive equipment, emptying bins overflowing with discarded aspirations and forgotten lunches. But now, every interaction, however brief, felt charged with an unspoken tension. The covert discrimination she had anticipated, the systemic abuse Marcus had vaguely feared, began to manifest in insidious ways. It wasn't always a direct insult, but rather a slow, methodical chipping away at human dignity. There was the quiet expectation, for instance, that she would pick up after employees who routinely left their discarded food wrappers, empty coffee cups, and even personal trash scattered around their workstations. Despite clearly marked bins just feet away, It was a subtle assertion of dominance, an unspoken declaration that their mess was her responsibility, that their convenience outweighed her time and effort. She observed one young executive, impeccably dressed, deliberately push a half-eaten sandwich off his desk with his foot, watching it land squarely on the pristine carpet she had just vacuumed. Before turning back to his computer without a word, his eyes, though not meeting hers, held a casual insolence, a silent dare. Another instance involved the break room. Eloise noticed a pattern whenever she was using the microwave or the coffee machine. Employees would suddenly decide they needed to wait for their turn elsewhere, or would stand conspicuously far away, their bodies angled as if to avoid accidental contact. The air would grow thick with an awkward silence that lasted until she had finished and moved away, after which the chatter would resume as though a spell had been broken. It was a silent ostracism, a way of marking her as other, as someone whose presence diminished their space. The irony was not lost on her. She, a woman of significant means and influence, was being treated as if her very touch contaminated the shared amenities. The systemic nature of the discrimination became clearer in the way resources were allocated. The cleaning supplies provided were often subpar, forcing her to expend more physical effort to achieve the high standards she maintained. Requesting replacements or better equipment was met with bureaucratic delays and thinly veiled skepticism from the administrative staff responsible for supplies. "Are you sure you're using it correctly?" Eloise, a young, perpetually exasperated assistant, once asked, her tone condescending, implying incompetence rather than inadequate tools. Meanwhile, the office managers enjoyed premium, ergonomic chairs, state-of-the-art technology, and readily available resources for even trivial requests. The disparity underscored a deeper truth: the company valued its visible employees, its profit generators, while viewing its invisible workforce as expendable, their needs secondary, their well-being irrelevant. She also witnessed the casual disregard for the personal belongings of the cleaning staff. On several occasions, she found her small personal locker in the basement changing room had been tampered with, not robbed, but simply disheveled, as if someone had carelessly rummaged through it. Once, her small thermos, which she used for her herbal tea, was found cracked in the communal sink, clearly broken deliberately rather than accidentally. These were small acts, almost insignificant in isolation, but together they painted a picture of a pervasive disrespect, a constant reminder to the cleaning staff that their personal space and possessions held no sanctity within these walls. The cumulative effect was draining. A quiet but persistent assault on morale. Eloise noted the behavior of the other cleaners as well. They moved through their days with a weary resignation, their shoulders hunched, or their eyes often downcast. They rarely spoke above a whisper, their conversations muted, their laughter tentative and quickly suppressed. The Greg Simmons incident had resonated deeply with them, confirming their unspoken fears and reinforcing their sense of vulnerability. She heard snippets of their conversations, hushed complaints about unfair demands, about being overlooked for small considerations, about the daily burden of feeling unseen and unvalued. They were trapped in a cycle of endurance, too dependent on their meager wages to risk challenging the system. Their silence, born of necessity, fueled the very culture of impunity. As days turned into a week, the hidden camera continued its silent vigil, capturing not just isolated incidents, but the chilling normalcy of this covert abuse. Eloise meticulously documented the times, the locations, the specific behaviors. She felt the weight of her disguise growing heavier, the constant suppression of her true self, her real identity, becoming almost unbearable. She longed to shed the uniform, to confront these individuals not as a cleaner, but as Madame Eloise Carter, a force to be reckoned with. Yet, she knew the evidence needed to be undeniable, irrefutable. She needed to expose the systemic rot, not just the individual bad actors. The incident with Greg Simmons, while publicly humiliating, had galvanized her. It transformed her mission from simple observation into a focused investigation, an urgent quest for comprehensive proof. She understood now that Marcus's concerns were not merely about isolated bad apples, but about a pervasive culture of insensitivity that allowed such behavior to flourish. This was not just about the loud, overt acts of discrimination, but about the quiet, daily indignities that chipped away at the souls of those at the bottom of the corporate ladder. She observed the complicity of silence from the other office employees, a silent agreement to ignore, to look away, to not intervene. This quiet acceptance was perhaps more damning than any single act of overt aggression. Eloise felt a rising tide of indignation, a powerful surge of purpose. Her past experiences had taught her about the insidious nature of subtle discrimination, how it could fester and poison an entire environment. She knew that simply firing Greg Simmons wouldn't solve the deeper problem if the underlying culture remained. She needed to expose the entire ecosystem of indifference, the unspoken hierarchy that allowed a black CEO's mother to be treated with such disdain simply because of the uniform she wore. Every dropped wrapper, every averted gaze, every casual dismissal fueled her resolve. The stage was being set, not for a simple dismissal, but for a seismic shift, a dramatic reckoning that would shake the very foundations of this corporation. The suffocating atmosphere of pervasive indifference and subtle disrespect continued to press down on Eloise. Every day brought new layers of indignity, each seemingly minor incident accumulating like dust motes in the sterile air, yet collectively forming a suffocating cloud. Her disguise, once a tool of observation, now felt like a heavy shroud, binding her in a silent struggle. She yearned to shed the uniform, to unleash the formidable woman she truly was, to confront the casual cruelty with the full force of her authority. But her purpose was clear: to gather irrefutable, undeniable evidence that would expose the systemic rot Marcus suspected. One afternoon, as she pushed her cart past a row of cubicles, she overheard a hushed conversation. It was the young woman with the curious, empathetic eyes, the one who had briefly met Eloise's gaze during the water incident. Her name, Eloise had learned from a stray ID badge, was Sarah. Sarah was speaking to a colleague, her voice low and tight with frustration. "I just don't understand how people can be so blind," she muttered, her words barely audible. "Did you see what he did to Eloise and everyone just watched? It's disgusting." Her colleague, a man named David, merely shrugged, a weary defeat in his posture. "What are we supposed to do?" Sarah challenged Greg. "You know how he is? We just end up on his bad side, and then where would we be this economy? You can't risk your job for a cleaner." His words, though cynical, were spoken with a hint of genuine fear, a reflection of the pervasive power dynamics at play. Sarah scoffed, her voice tinged with anger. "So we just let it happen. We become complicit." "That's not right, David. That's not how Marcus built this company." Her voice trailed off, a silent acknowledgement that the company Marcus had built was subtly, insidiously being undermined. Eloise felt a spark of hope. Not everyone was blind, not everyone was complicit. There was at least one conscience stirring in this morass of apathy. Later that day, as Eloise was emptying the recycling bin in the administrative wing, she noticed a discarded post-it note stuck to the side of a desk. It was Sarah's desk. On the note, in Sarah's neat handwriting, were the words Greg Simmons, Q1 budget discrepancies, check supply orders, admin code 7B. It was a small detail, but Eloise's mind, honed by decades of sharp business acumen, immediately recognized its significance. Admin code 7B likely referred to a specific category of supplies, perhaps one prone to manipulation or inflated orders. This was not a complaint about mistreatment, but a potential financial irregularity, a different kind of rot beneath the surface. It suggested that Greg Simmons's questionable ethics extended beyond his treatment of employees, hinting at a pattern of behavior that could be far more damaging to the company. Eloise carefully detached the post-it note, subtly folding it into her palm. This was her first act of direct, albeit covert, resistance, a a quiet alliance forged with an unwitting ally. She understood that exposing financial malfeasance would be a powerful lever, a way to hit Greg Simmons where it truly hurt his reputation and his career. It would also further solidify Marcus's resolve to clean house, demonstrating that the cultural rot extended into areas of fiscal responsibility. She knew that Marcus would see this not just as a financial issue, but as a symptom of the broader lack of integrity that allowed such casual cruelty to flourish. The next morning, Eloise positioned herself strategically near the main office printer, feigning a prolonged struggle with a paper jam. She watched as Marcus, her son, strode past, engrossed in a phone call. As he neared, she subtly dropped the crumpled post-it note near his foot, ensuring it landed in his direct path without drawing attention to herself. It was a calculated risk, a small, almost invisible gesture designed to pique his curiosity without compromising her cover. Marcus, ever observant, glanced down, his eyes catching the brightly colored scrap of paper. He paused, ended his call with a brief, "I'll call you back," and bent to retrieve it. His brow furrowed as he read the hastily scrawled words. Eloise, from her vantage point, saw a flicker of concern, then an almost imperceptible narrowing of his eyes. He slipped the note into his pocket, his gaze briefly sweeping the area, a silent acknowledgement of the unexpected information. Her heart gave a small, triumphant leap. The seed was planted. This quiet, almost invisible act of resistance was her way of initiating the process of exposure without jeopardizing her role as the unseen observer. It was a strategic move, leveraging an internal complaint to highlight the larger moral decay within the company. She knew that Marcus, with his keen understanding of business ethics, would investigate the financial lead with rigor, and in doing so, he would inevitably uncover more than just budget discrepancies. The information about Greg Simmons's character, his patterns of disrespect, would start to surface over the next few days. Eloise noticed subtle shifts. Marcus appeared more frequently on the executive floor, his presence more deliberate, his gaze more piercing as he observed interactions between employees. He held longer, more private meetings with his CFO and head of HR. The energy on the executive floor, usually a hive of confident chatter, seemed to acquire a nervous edge. Greg Simmons, however, remained oblivious, perhaps emboldened by the continued silence around the water incident. He continued his dismissive behavior. Though Eloise noted a slight increase in his interactions with the administrative assistant he regularly tasked with unusual supply orders, a faint tremor of anxiety now detectable in his voice when he spoke to her. The trap was slowly closing. Eloise continued her meticulous cleaning, a silent witness to the subtle unfolding of her plan. She observed Sarah, who seemed to carry a quiet burden of conscience, occasionally glancing at Eloise with a look of shared, unspoken understanding. There was no direct communication, no overt alliance, but a connection had been forged in the shared indignation. Eloise knew that when the truth eventually erupted, Sarah would be a crucial witness, a moral compass in a sea of indifference. The first act of resistance, seemingly minor, was a carefully aimed shot. It was a testament to Eloise's deep understanding of human nature and corporate dynamics. She wasn't merely exposing individual bad actors. She was targeting the systemic vulnerabilities, the financial and ethical breaches that created fertile ground for casual racism and disrespect to thrive. The post-it note, a seemingly insignificant scrap of paper, was a Trojan horse, carrying within it the potential to dismantle the entire edifice of power that Greg Simmons had so arrogantly constructed. The stage was now wet for the next phase of the drama, where the quiet whispers of injustice would finally erupt into a public confrontation. The tension in the office, once an undercurrent, was now a palpable presence, waiting for the spark that would ignite it. The corporate air, once thick with an almost suffocating indifference, now crackled with an unspoken tension. Marcus, fueled by his mother's silent provocation and Sarah's unwitting tip-off, had launched a discreet but thorough internal investigation. His presence on the executive floor became irregular, almost predatory, Fixture. He was observing, questioning, his gaze sharper, his demeanor more reserved. The subtle shifts in behavior amongst the staff were telling nervous glances, hushed conversations that abruptly ceased upon his approach. A palpable sense of unease settling over the departments directly under Greg Simmons's purview. Greg, however, remained largely unperturbed, his arrogance a thick shield against introspection, though Eloise noted a growing edginess in his interactions, a slight tremor in his voice when addressing certain administrative tasks. The climactic confrontation erupted on a Thursday morning, during the weekly executive meeting. Typically a staid affair of quarterly reports and strategic planning, Eloise, adhering to her cleaning schedule, was meticulously wiping down the conference room table, her movements slow and deliberate, designed to ensure her presence was normalized, overlooked. A tiny, almost imperceptible camera lens, embedded in a button on her uniform, continued its silent vigil. Marcus, at the head of the polished mahogany table, began the meeting with the usual pleasantries, but his voice held an unusual gravitas. He quickly pivoted from financial updates to an unexpected agenda item, company culture and employee conduct. A ripple of murmurs went through the room. Greg Simmons, seated opposite Marcus, shifted uncomfortably, a frown creasing his brow. As many of you know, Marcus began, his voice calm but firm. This company was founded on principles of respect, integrity, and equal opportunity for all. It is disheartening, therefore, to learn that these core values may have been compromised. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Recent investigations have brought to light certain disturbing patterns of behavior, both ethical and interpersonal, that fall significantly short of the standards we uphold. He then projected a series of documents onto the large screen. The first few slides detailed questionable expenditures, inflated supply orders, and dubious vendor relationships, all linked directly to Greg Simmons's department. Sarah, who had been brought into the meeting by Marcus for her insightful observations, sat quietly, her face a mixture of apprehension and grim satisfaction, as Marcus detailed the financial irregularities. Greg's face grew pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He began to stammer. Marcus, these are just clerical errors, misunderstandings. But Marcus held up a hand, silencing him. These clerical errors, Greg, amount to significant financial discrepancies that directly impact our bottom line. More critically, they reflect a systemic lack of oversight and a blatant disregard for company policy. The air in the room grew heavy. Other executives, initially passive, now leaned forward, their expressions shifting from curiosity to open concern. Then, Marcus's tone hardened. However, he continued, financial impropriety is only one facet of the disturbing pattern we've uncovered. There have also been numerous reports, and now, undeniable evidence, of gross misconduct in a pervasive culture of disrespect, particularly towards our support staff. He clicked a button, and the large screen flickered to life with a video. It was the footage from Eloise's hidden camera. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the projector. The video began with Eloise meticulously cleaning the glass wall. Then, Greg Simmons appeared, phone to his ear, his voice rising in anger. The collective gasp from the executives was almost audible as Greg deliberately swung his arm, splashing the water directly onto Eloise. The cold, unfeeling laughter that followed. Greg's sarcastic, "Oh, my apologies, cleaner," echoed through the silent room, magnified by the speakers. The humiliation Eloise had felt in that moment was now laid bare for everyone to see. The faces of the executives ranged from shock to disgust. Some averted their eyes, unable to meet the image of such casual cruelty. Others stared, their jaws slack. The video continued, showing Greg's triumphant sneer as he walked away, and the lingering shot of Eloise, drenched and silently enduring. While most of the office workers looked away or secretly filmed the incident, Marcus watched the reactions, his face a mask of controlled fury. He then played another clip, and then another, a montage of subtle indignities Eloise had endured, the deliberate pushing of trash onto the floor, The awkward silence in the break room, the casual disrespect for her personal belongings. Each clip, though short, was a powerful indictment of a culture that enabled such behavior. "This," Marcus stated, his voice ringing with authority, "is Madame Eloise Carter, my mother." The announcement hit the room like a physical blow. A collective gasp, louder this time, swept through the executives. Faces contorted in disbelief, confusion, and dawning horror. Greg Simmons, who had been slumped in his chair, suddenly sat bolt upright, his face a ghastly shade of white, his eyes widened with utter terror. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish out of water. The man who had reveled in public humiliation was now publicly humiliated in the most profound way imaginable. "My mother," Marcus repeated, allowing the shock to fully register, "volunteered to go undercover, to assess the true climate of this company, to see how those we rely on, those who are often unseen, are truly treated. What she witnessed, and what you have just witnessed, is not just unacceptable, it is a betrayal of everything this company stands for." He looked directly at Greg Simmons, his eyes blazing. "Greg, your actions are not merely unprofessional. They are discriminatory, dehumanizing, and fundamentally unethical. The financial improprieties are a clear breach of trust. But your treatment of a fellow human being, particularly one you believe to be powerless, is unforgivable. And to think this happened to my own mother, while she was actively trying to help me understand the company's failings, only underscores the depth of your moral bankruptcy." The witnesses in the room, initially paralyzed by shock, now began to stir. The executives who had perhaps silently condoned such behavior, or simply chosen to look away, now faced their own complicity. The video footage, combined with the bombshell revelation of Eloise's true identity, was irrefutable evidence, a powerful indictment of not just Greg, but the tacit acceptance of his behavior. The truth, in all its uncomfortable glory, was finally unmasked. The silence that followed was not of indifference, but of a profound, collective reckoning. The immediate aftermath of Greg Simmons's dramatic dismissal and the shocking revelation of Eloise's undercover mission sent tremors throughout the corporate landscape, reverberating far beyond the marble halls of Marcus's company. The news, amplified by pervasive online platforms and traditional news outlets, quickly morphed from a sensational corporate scandal into a potent symbol of systemic racial injustice. The initial outrage against Greg Simmons broadened into a collective introspection about the subtle and overt forms of discrimination that persist in workplaces globally. Marcus, with Eloise's quiet guidance, moved swiftly to address the fallout and instigate meaningful change. He held a series of emotional town hall meetings with employees, not just in the executive suite, but in every department, including the often overlooked cleaning and maintenance divisions. In these meetings, he candidly acknowledged the deep-seated issues that Eloise's mission had exposed. He spoke not just of policy changes, but of a fundamental shift in mindset, urging every employee to become an active participant in building a truly inclusive environment. His raw honesty and genuine remorse resonated deeply, beginning the slow process of healing and rebuilding trust. Eloise, no longer disguised, became a powerful, inspiring figure. She chose to share her story, not in a manner of vengeful triumph, but with a dignified clarity that illuminated the pain and pervasive nature of discrimination. Her voice, calm and measured, carried immense weight. She appeared on national news programs, her presence commanding, her words resonating with millions. She recounted the seemingly small indignities, the discarded trash, the averted gazes, the unspoken biases that accumulate into a profound sense of dehumanization. She explained her motivation, not to humiliate Greg Simmons, but to expose the rot that allowed individuals like him to thrive with impunity, to illustrate how casual racism permeated even seemingly progressive environments. It's not just about the overt acts of malice, she stated in one particularly impactful interview, her eyes piercingly direct. It's about the silent complicity, the convenient blindness, the willingness to look away when someone is being treated as less than human. True justice isn't just punishing the perpetrator, it's dismantling the system that enables such behavior. Her words, devoid of bitterness, struck a powerful chord, sparking conversations in homes and workplaces across the nation. Her story gained immense traction across various online platforms. The video clips, particularly the one of Greg Simmons splashing water on her, quickly became viral content, sparking a flood of personal testimonies from individuals who had endured similar workplace discrimination. People shared their own stories, creating a powerful digital movement that resonated deeply. From service industry workers recounting disrespectful treatment to corporate professionals detailing subtle biases that hindered their careers. The outpouring of shared experiences was overwhelming. It fostered a profound sense of solidarity, transforming individual, isolated experiences of injustice into a collective narrative of resilience and demand for change. The public impact transcended mere discussion. Other companies, fearing similar exposure or genuinely inspired by the unfolding events, began to reevaluate their own diversity and inclusion policies. Some announced internal audits, others committed to unconscious bias training, and a few even reached out to Marcus's company for guidance on implementing real, impactful cultural reform. The story of Eloise and Marcus became a case study, a stark warning and a beacon of hope, demonstrating the profound consequences of inaction and the transformative power of courageous leadership beyond the corporate world. Eloise also focused on community outreach. She lent her considerable influence to grassroots organizations dedicated to workers' rights and racial equality. She sponsored educational programs, spoke at universities, and supported initiatives aimed at empowering marginalized communities to advocate for themselves. She emphasized that true change began with awareness, with understanding the systemic nature of discrimination, and with developing the courage to speak up. Even when it was difficult, her focus remained steadfast on systemic change. She understood that firing one individual, no matter how egregious his actions, was merely a first step. The deeper work involved dismantling the implicit biases, the ingrained prejudices, and the power imbalances that allowed such behavior to flourish. She worked closely with Marcus and his HR team to redesign internal reporting mechanisms, ensuring that employees felt safe and empowered to come forward with the grievances without fear of reprisal. They implemented anonymous feedback channels and established an independent ombudsman's office to investigate complaints. The personal toll of her undercover mission, the emotional weight of reliving past traumas, was significant. Yet, Eloise channeled that pain into purpose. She understood that her position, her privilege, and her experience made her uniquely suited to ignite this crucial conversation. She was not just a victim who found justice, she was a catalyst for broader societal awakening. Her quiet strength and unwavering determination became a source of inspiration for countless individuals who had long suffered in silence. The story of the Black CEO's mother who disguised herself as a cleaner became a powerful narrative of resilience, exposing the hidden wounds of discrimination and paving the way for a more just and equitable future. The momentum for change was building, fueled by Eloise's unwavering resolve and the collective voice of those who had found their own courage through her story. The ripple effect of Eloise's courage extended far beyond the immediate overhaul of Marcus's corporation. The story became a touchstone, a powerful testament to the enduring fight against injustice and the profound impact of individual bravery. Months later, the changes implemented within the company were palpable. The newly established ombudsman's office, overseen by an independent legal team, had processed numerous complaints, leading to further dismissals of individuals who had perpetuated discriminatory practices or had demonstrated gross negligence in upholding company values. The mandatory sensitivity training, initially met with cynicism by some, had evolved into genuine dialogues, fostering a newfound awareness and empathy among employees. The once silent cleaning staff now spoke openly, their voices heard, their concerns addressed with respect and urgency. Marcus, having learned an invaluable lesson from his mother, had become a more empathetic and proactive leader. His vision for true corporate equality solidified. The climax of this transformation arrived with the company's annual shareholder meeting, an event traditionally focused on financial performance. This year, however, Marcus had planned something different, something profoundly significant. He had rearranged the agenda, placing a special recognition ceremony for his mother at the very forefront. Before any financial reports were presented, the grand auditorium buzzed with anticipation, filled not only with shareholders and employees, but also with community leaders, representatives from workers' rights organizations, and national media. As Marcus took the stage, the hushed murmurs subsided. He began not with platitudes, but with a raw and honest reflection on the company's recent struggles and the uncomfortable truths that had emerged. He spoke of the blindness that privilege can sometimes create, the insidious nature of casual contempt, and the profound lesson his mother had imparted. "We stand here today," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction, "not just as a company moving forward, but as a community awakened. My mother showed us the true cost of indifference, the devastating impact of treating any human being as less than." She held a mirror to our faces, and what we saw was not always pretty, but it was necessary. Then, with a gesture of profound respect, Marcus invited Madame Eloise Carter to join him on stage. As she walked forward, no longer in a cleaner's uniform, but in an elegant, tailored suit, the entire auditorium rose in a spontaneous standing ovation. The applause was deafening, a cascade of genuine appreciation, admiration, and a collective acknowledgement of the discomforting truths she had exposed. Eloise, her face composed, her eyes shining with quiet dignity, acknowledged the crowd with a graceful nod. Marcus presented her with a specially commissioned award, not for a corporate achievement, but for courage in the pursuit of justice and dignity for all. The citation on the plaque read, "To Madame Eloise Carter, whose unwavering integrity, profound empathy, and extraordinary courage illuminated the path to a more just and equitable future for all within our organization and beyond. Your quiet sacrifice awakened a community, and your enduring message inspires us to see the unseen." When Eloise took the microphone, the applause slowly subsided, replaced by an eager silence. Her voice, calm and steady, filled the vast space. She spoke not of the personal insults she had endured, but of the systemic issues she had witnessed. She spoke of the importance of recognizing the humanity in every individual, regardless of their role or perceived status. She addressed the power of complicity, the danger of looking away, and the moral imperative to speak up against injustice. "The uniform I wore," she stated, her gaze sweeping across the faces in the audience, "was a disguise. Yes, but it was also a revelation. It stripped away my identity, and in doing so, it revealed the true identities of others. It showed me the profound difference between polite tolerance and genuine respect. It showed me how easily the dignity of those who perform essential, often invisible, labor can be eroded by casual contempt." She continued, her words echoing with profound wisdom. "Justice is not merely about punishment. It is about restoration. It is about creating environments where every individual feels seen, valued, and respected. It is about dismantling the subtle biases and the overt aggressions that seek to diminish us. It is about cultivating a culture where empathy is not just a word in a mission statement, but a living, breathing principle." Her message was clear, powerful, and devoid of rancor. Let us not forget the lessons learned here. Let us carry them forward, not just in this company, but in our homes, our communities, and every space we inhabit. Let us commit to seeing the unseen, valuing the undervalued, and speaking for the voiceless. For in doing so, we do not just uplift others, we uplift ourselves, and we build a more just and compassionate world for all. The emotionally charged ending left the audience in profound silence for a moment, before erupting once more in fervent applause. Her words were a rallying cry, a clear message etched into the consciousness of every person present. The story of Eloise Carter would not be just a tale of corporate scandal, but a timeless narrative of resilience, a bold reminder that true leadership, true justice, often begins with the quiet courage to shine a light on uncomfortable truths. The community had awakened, galvanized by her sacrifice, and the legacy of her mission would echo for generations to come, a testament to the power of a single, dignified voice in the face of widespread indifference. Justice, in its truest form, had not just been served, it had been sown, promising a harvest of greater equity and humanity.